It is 4 o'clock in the morning, Wednesday, March 28, 1979. Inside the control room of the 3 Mile Island Unit, 2 nuclear power plant, near Middletown, Pennsylvania, a routine mechanical failure in a water pump sets off an automatic chain reaction. Within seconds, the turbine shuts down. The reactor shuts down. Pressure inside the reactor's primary cooling system begins to climb. A relief valve opens automatically, exactly as designed to release that pressure. It is supposed to close again once the pressure returns to normal. It doesn't close. For the next 2 hours and 20 minutes, that valve sits stuck open, silently draining the water that is supposed to be covering and cooling the radioactive fuel inside the reactor core. And the control room has no idea. The instrument panel in front of the operators shows a light indicating the valve has received the signal to close. To every person in that room, the panel says the valve is shut. The panel is wrong. Nobody in the control room has any way of knowing that, because the plant was never built with a way to directly confirm whether that valve was actually open or closed. The light only tracked whether the command had been sent, not whether the valve had obeyed it. As the reactor core slowly loses its cooling water, operators watch pressure readings drop and conclude, based on their training, that there is too much water in the system, not too little. They take the exact opposite of the action the reactor needs. By morning, roughly half of the reactor core has melted. It becomes the most serious accident in the history of American commercial nuclear power. No one dies, no one is injured. But for several tense days, a nation watches, uncertain whether Pennsylvania is about to experience a catastrophe. This is the story of 3 Mile Island and the control panel that told the operators exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong moment. To understand what happened in that control room, you need to understand the plant and the small mechanical failure that started everything. 3 Mile Island Unit 2 was a pressurized water reactor, one of 2 reactors on an island in the Susquehanna River near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It had only been in commercial operation for about 3 months. On the night of March 28th, it was running at close to full power. At around 4 in the morning, something ordinary went wrong. In the plant's secondary system, the non-nuclear side that handles the water and steam used to spin the turbine and generate electricity, the main feedwater pumps stopped working, most likely due to a mechanical or electrical fault. Without those pumps, the steam generators could no longer remove heat from the reactor's primary cooling loop the way they were supposed to. This kind of failure was anticipated. The plant had backup auxiliary feedwater pumps specifically designed to take over in exactly this situation. When the main pumps failed, the auxiliary pumps switched on automatically, just as designed. But the valves that would have let water from those auxiliary pumps actually reach the steam generators were closed. They had been closed for routine maintenance work in the days before the accident. And closing them during maintenance was, investigators later determined, a direct violation of the plant's own operating rules, which required those valves to remain open whenever the reactor was running. For reasons never fully resolved, they had not been reopened afterward. So when the auxiliary pumps kicked in exactly as designed, there was nowhere for the water to go. For approximately 8 minutes, the backup safety system built specifically for this scenario was completely useless, not because it failed, but because 2 valves upstream of it had been left in the wrong position. Meanwhile, with heat no longer being removed properly from the primary system, pressure and temperature inside the reactor's cooling loop climbed rapidly. As designed, a pressure relief valve at the top of a component called the pressurizer opened automatically to vent that excess pressure, sending steam and water down into a drain tank in the basement of the reactor building. This, too, was normal, expected behavior. The valve was supposed to open under these conditions, and it was supposed to close again once pressure dropped back to a safe level. It didn't. The valve mechanically stuck in the open position. And here is the detail that would come to define the entire accident. The instrument in the control room that was meant to tell operators the valve's status did not actually measure whether the valve was open or closed. It measured whether an electrical signal telling the valve to close had been sent. The signal was sent. The light on the panel turned off, indicating to every operator reading it that the valve had closed. The valve itself never got the message. It stayed open for more than 2 hours, and the plant's own control room had absolutely no direct way of knowing. What followed was one of the most consequential misdiagnoses in the history of American industry. Not because the operators were careless, but because almost everything in front of them was telling them the wrong story. With the relief valve stuck open and undetected, water and steam continued draining out of the primary cooling system, uncovering more and more of the reactor's fuel core. As that water escaped, water levels in the pressurizer, a separate component used to manage pressure in the system, actually appeared to rise because steam was forming in the reactor core itself and pushing water up into the pressurizer. To the operators, trained extensively on the plant's instrumentation, this rising pressurizer level looked like a system that had too much water in it, not too little. It is difficult to overstate how counterintuitive the actual situation was. The core was losing its cooling water rapidly, even as the specific gauge the operators were watching told them the opposite. Believing they were dealing with too much water in the system, the operators did what their training told them to do in that scenario. They throttled back the emergency cooling pumps that had automatically activated when the crisis began, pumps that were, in fact, correctly and appropriately trying to replace the water the stuck-open valve was steadily draining away. The operators reduced the very thing that was keeping the reactor's fuel from being exposed. For roughly 2 hours, this misunderstanding persisted. Alarms sounded. Warning lights flashed. So many, so quickly, that investigators later found the sheer volume of simultaneous alarms actively made it harder, not easier, for operators to identify the specific problem at the heart of the event. The control room was, by design, meant to give operators clarity in a crisis. Instead, it delivered a flood of information, much of it either misleading or simply overwhelming. At the exact moment clarity mattered most. It was not any single instrument, and not any single operator's mistake, that caused the situation to spiral. It was a chain, a valve stuck open with no direct way to detect it, a maintenance oversight that disabled a backup safety system for the accident's critical opening minutes, and a control room design that presented ambiguous, at times actively misleading, information during precisely the period when fast, correct interpretation mattered most. Later analysis would conclude that approximately half of the reactor's fuel core had melted. 2 weeks after the accident, President Jimmy Carter established a formal investigative body, the President's Commission on the Accident at 3 Mile Island, led by Dartmouth College President John Kemeny. Its findings, published in October 1979, would reshape the American nuclear power industry for decades. The Kemeny Commission's conclusions were notably different from what many had expected going in. Rather than framing the accident primarily as a story of mechanical failure, the Commission placed significant emphasis on what it called deficiencies in control room instrumentation and inadequate operator training as root causes. The relief valve sticking open was, in the Commission's analysis, a relatively ordinary mechanical failure. The Commission's report was also sharply critical of the plant's operator and of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's broader oversight practices. Investigators found that a nearly identical incident, a relief valve sticking open at a similarly designed reactor, had occurred at another nuclear plant more than a year before the 3 Mile Island accident. Extensive independent studies conducted in the accident's aftermath, examined by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and outside health researchers, concluded that the radioactive material released during the accident was too limited in quantity to have caused any measurable direct health effects to plant workers or nearby residents. No deaths, injuries, or confirmed radiation-related illnesses were ultimately attributed to the event. But the consequences for the industry were sweeping and immediate. Within 9 months, the nuclear power industry had formed the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, an organization created specifically to promote higher standards of safety and reliability across every commercial nuclear plant in the country. Reactor operator training programs were fundamentally redesigned, with far greater emphasis on interpreting ambiguous or contradictory instrument readings, and on the kind of full-scope simulator training that could expose operators to complex, multi-failure scenarios before they ever faced one in a live control room. 3 Mile Island Unit 2 itself never operated again. Its sister reactor, Unit 1, continued operating for decades afterward before eventually being retired. The accident did not kill anyone, but it exposed, in the starkest possible terms, a principle that has echoed through nearly every disaster this channel has examined. A warning light that tells you a valve is closed is not the same thing as a valve that is actually closed. The gap between what an instrument reports and what is physically, truly happening in the world it is meant to represent is not a small technical detail. It is exactly the space in which disasters are built. Subscribe to Error Code Human, featuring new documentaries every week.